The Birth of a Nation, 1915, though heralded as a groundbreaking epic for its use of large-scale battle scenes, close-ups, and innovative camera work back in the day, The Birth of a Nation movie remains one of the most controversial movies in American history. Directed by Griffith, it pushed narrative filmmaking forward at a time when movies were still finding their identity, demonstrating how camera angles, cross-cutting, and dramatic pacing could captivate audiences. However, its storyline glorifies racist ideologies, depicting Black Americans through offensive stereotypes and painting extremist groups as heroic saviors. Civil rights organizations fiercely protested the film upon its release, warning that it fueled hatred and widened racial divisions. Despite the uproar, it was a box office sensation, and politicians, including U.S. President Wilson, reportedly praised its cinematic achievements. Today, film scholars acknowledge its massive influence on the language of cinema, while also condemning its toxic messaging. Modern screenings often include disclaimers or panel discussions addressing its historical context, underscoring the film's dual legacy as both a monumental technical leap and a morally reprehensible piece of propaganda. For many, it serves as a stark example that cinematic brilliance can be weaponized to promote hateful narratives, reinforcing the idea that with great storytelling power comes great responsibility. Scarface, 1932, directed by Howard Hawks and produced by Howard Hughes, Scarface arrived during a wave of gangster films, but upped the ante with its raw depiction of organized crime. Loosely inspired by real-life mobster Al Capone, it follows the violent ascent of Tony Camonte, who wields machine guns and fear to dominate the underworld. Audiences in the early 1930s found these scenes shockingly graphic, and moral watchdogs worried it would glamorize a life of crime. Censorship boards demanded multiple edits, including an alternate ending punishing the anti-hero more decisively. Even so, critics and viewers hotly debated whether it sensationalized violence for ticket sales. Its gritty realism and frantic pace set it apart from other crime dramas of the era, influencing future classics like The Godfather and Goodfellas. The film also delves into media sensationalism, showing how newspapers turned criminals into folk legends, reflecting societal fascination with celebrity criminals. Although overshadowed now by the 1983 remake starring Al Pacino, the original Scarface was audacious for its day, illustrating how Hollywood was willing to push boundaries to captivate audiences. It remains a milestone in gangster cinema, equal parts enthralling spectacle and a cautionary tale about ambition turned to mayhem. Freaks, 1932. When Todd Browning's Freaks hit theaters in 1932, it unnerved audiences with its cast of real sideshow performers. The film tells the story of a close-knit troupe of individuals with physical differences who are betrayed by a cruel trapeze artist and her strongman accomplice. Browning, once a carnival worker himself, aimed to humanize the so-called freaks and expose society's shallow perceptions. Yet many viewers saw it as exploitative, uncomfortable, with witnessing bodies they'd rarely seen on screen. Critics slammed the film, branding it grotesque and unwatchable. Censorship boards demanded cuts to some of the more startling moments, and in certain places, it was outright banned. The controversy overshadowed the film's compassionate heart, which empathizes with outsiders shunned by the mainstream. Over time, Freaks gained a cult following. Scholars and film buffs reevaluated its portrayals, noting how it flipped the script. The performers come across as dignified, even sympathetic, whereas the beautiful villains appear monstrous. Modern critics often cite it as an early challenge to conventional standards of beauty and normalcy. Today, its legacy endures as both a piece of transgressive cinema and an important conversation starter about empathy versus spectacle. The Great Dictator, 1940, Charlie Chaplin took a major risk moving from silent comedy into a talkie that mocked totalitarianism, a brave stance given world tensions. The Great Dictator stars Chaplin in dual roles, a gentle Jewish barber and a tyrannical ruler, parodying Adolf Hitler. At the time, some saw it as too bold or dangerous to lampoon such a deadly threat, but Chaplin believed humor could undermine a dictator's aura of fear. The film's slapstick sequences clash with the seriousness of its political subtext, creating a jarring but effective satire. Some theaters, wary of retribution or controversy, refused to show it. Critics debated whether it trivialized the horrors unfolding in Europe, yet many celebrated its defiance. Ultimately, it garnered worldwide attention for its unflinching stance at a moment when alliances and ideologies were in upheaval. Culminating in Chaplin's famous final speech, a heartfelt plea for kindness and unity, The Great Dictator has become an iconic cultural artifact. It ushered in a new understanding of how comedy could serve as resistance, inspiring future political satires. While some aspects have aged, its call for empathy and condemnation of tyranny remains powerful, reminding us that laughter can be a formidable weapon against oppression. Citizen Kane, 1941. Often hailed as one of the greatest films ever made, Citizen Kane marked Orson Welles' astonishing directorial debut. It follows the life of Charles Foster Kane, a newspaper magnate whose ambitions and desires shape a formidable media empire. Welles employed pioneering techniques, deep-focus cinematography, overlapping dialogue, and a fractured timeline to create a portrait of a man unraveling under the weight of his own legend. From the outset, the film's parallels to real-life mogul William Randolph Hearst ignited controversy. Hearst used his media clout to squash ads and reviews, effectively blacklisting the movie from many theaters. Despite the pushback, critics who did see Citizen Kane recognized its revolutionary narrative style. Welles, only 25 at the time, demonstrated astonishing command of visuals and storytelling, casting a long shadow over future directors. At its core, the film dissects the corrupting nature of power and the fragile illusions of wealth. Its signature motif, Rosebud, became a cinematic touchstone, inviting viewers to debate the meaning of Kane's last word. Though overshadowed initially by Hearst's vendetta, Citizen Kane eventually found the acclaim it deserved, exemplifying how innovative technique and bold subject matter can triumph over political pressure in the annals of film history. The Outlaw, 1943, bankrolled by the ever-eccentric Howard Hughes. The Outlaw stirred scandal chiefly for promoting actress Jane Russell's physique as a major selling point. Ostensibly a Western about Billy the Kid, Doc Holliday, and romantic entanglements, its actual plot often took a back seat to the uproar over Russell's revealing wardrobe. The motion picture production code demanded cuts, citing immoral content. Hughes fought back, delaying the movie's release and igniting widespread curiosity. Beyond its sexual overtones, the film offers a somewhat unconventional approach to the Western genre, mixing humor and romantic jealousy with dusty showdowns. Critics of the time were torn. Some dismissed it as tawdry sensationalism, while others found it a refreshing twist on predictable cowboy fare. The marketing, dripping with innuendo, further fueled audience interest, turning what might have been a middling release into a box office success. In hindsight, The Outlaw is less about trailblazing storytelling and more about illustrating how censorship battles often generate free publicity. It also showcased Jane Russell's star power and Hughes's knack for courting controversy. Ultimately, it chipped away at Hollywood's strict moral codes, proving that public curiosity could overpower censorship boards when a film pushed the right buttons. Song of the South, 1946. At first glance, Song of the South appears to be a charming blend of live action and animation, featuring catchy tunes like Zip-a-Dee-Doo-Dah. Disney hoped to enchant audiences with tales of Uncle Remus, a kindly storyteller who shares animal fables in the post-Civil War South. Yet from its debut, civil rights groups criticized its portrayal of the era, arguing it glossed over the racial tensions and brutal aftermath of slavery. While Uncle Remus is depicted as wise and warm, opponents said this masked deeper issues. Over time, as social awareness grew, Song of the South faced escalating backlash. Critics argued the film perpetuated harmful stereotypes and romanticized a painful historical period. Disney periodically re-released the movie, but by the 1980s, growing protests led to its near-permanent removal from official circulation. Despite its technical merits, some call it a precursor to advanced live-action animation hybrids, Disney's reluctance to make it publicly available underscores the complexity of revisiting outdated portrayals. Many argue it should be preserved with historical context rather than hidden. Whether seen as an innocent relic or a troubling artifact, Song of the South remains a lightning rod for debates about how family entertainment addresses or ignores the darker chapters of American history. The Moon is Blue, 1953. In 1953, Otto Preminger's The Moon is Blue caused uproar merely for using words like virgin and mistress in its script. The film itself is a light romantic comedy about an earnest young woman pursued by two smitten men in Manhattan. By modern standards, it seems tame, but at the time, the production code found it scandalously frank about adult relationships. Preminger declined to tone down the dialogue, leading the production code to deny it approval, a move typically deemed box office poison. Surprisingly, audiences flocked to see what the fuss was about. Some viewers were disappointed to find it wasn't especially risque. Others appreciated its breezy willingness to acknowledge sexuality without smirking euphemisms. This success dealt a blow to Hollywood's censorship regime, showing that a movie could thrive without official sanction. Critics praised its wit, focusing on Maggie McNamara's clever performance and William Holden's charm. Meanwhile, moral guardians decried the film's refusal to conform. In retrospect, The Moon is Blue is remembered less for its content than for its role in shifting Hollywood norms, easing the path for more open discussions of romance and intimacy. It stands as a quaint but pivotal milestone in cinema's ongoing dance with censorship. The Man with the Golden Arm, 1955. In a decade known for squeaky clean images, The Man with the Golden Arm stunned audiences with its raw depiction of heroin addiction. Otto Preminger again challenged the production code, casting Frank Sinatra as Frankie Machine, a talented drummer struggling to kick his habit after rehab. Desperate and torn between crime and a fresh start, his journey highlights the despair of addiction in unflinching detail. The Code Office balked, considering drug abuse too taboo for mainstream cinema. Preminger refused to sanitize the script, releasing it independently. Critics were divided. Some applauded its empathetic portrayal of substance dependence, while others found it disturbingly graphic. Sinatra earned praise for his brooding performance, capturing Frankie's vulnerability and the torment of relapse. The film's success chipped away at censorship barriers, paving the way for future productions that addressed gritty social issues. Jazz composer Elmer Bernstein's tense, pulsing score mirrored the protagonist's inner chaos. Over time, The Man with the Golden Arm has come to symbolize a watershed moment when Hollywood began tackling real-world struggles without shrouding them in euphemism. It's now seen as a pioneering work that opened audiences' eyes to the devastating impact of addiction, marking an era where cinema started to confront darker human truths. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, director Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde exploded onto 1960s cinema with a mix of glamorized outlaw romance and raw violence. Starring Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, it told the true story of two Depression-era criminals who robbed banks and captured tabloid headlines in their quest for excitement and notoriety. While earlier crime films skirted around brutality, this film showed it head-on, featuring bloody shootouts and a near-sympathetic portrayal of its lawless duo. Critics were sharply divided. Traditional voices condemned the film as irresponsible, suggesting it glorified crime and played up the sexual allure of violence. Younger audiences, however, embraced its rebellious spirit and inventive editing style, seeing it as emblematic of the era's counterculture. The film's finale, a slow-motion hail of bullets, became instantly iconic and also one of the most debated endings of its time. Eventually, Bonnie and Clyde helped usher in the new Hollywood era, where established rules around violence, language, and authority were challenged. Its mix of pop energy and moral ambiguity influenced generations of filmmakers. Whether viewed as a romanticized gangster flick or a groundbreaking work that dared to blend humor, pathos, and graphic realism, it permanently altered the American crime genre, leaving in its wake a new cinematic appetite for moral complexity. Midnight Cowboy, 1969. The first and only X-rated film to win an Oscar for Best Picture, Midnight Cowboy thrust viewers into the gritty underbelly of late 1960s New York. Jon Voight stars as Joe Buck, a naive Texan determined to make a living as a male hustler, while Dustin Hoffman plays Ratso Rizzo, a sickly con artist with grand ambitions. Their unlikely friendship captures the stark loneliness and broken promises of the big city. Director John Schlesinger peppers the film with surreal dream sequences, raw depictions of casual sex, and unflinching takes on poverty. Early screenings shocked audiences with its candid approach to taboo themes. Homosexual encounters, drug use, and desperate hustling were rarely so openly displayed. Some critics blasted it as sordid exploitation, others praised its frankness and emotional depth. Yet its core is a poignant story of two marginalized souls finding solace in each other's company. The chemistry between Voight and Hoffman drives home the film's heartbreaking humanity. Harry Nilsson's Everybody's Talkin' sets the perfect wistful tone, blending hope with melancholic reality. Over time, Midnight Cowboy helped normalize mature storytelling in mainstream cinema, proving that unvarnished portrayals of life's harshest truths could resonate with critics and audiences alike. The Wild Bunch, 1969. Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch redefined the Western at a moment when Hollywood was evolving. No heroic Marlboro men here, just aging outlaws pushed to desperation as modernity creeps into their frontier world. Peckinpah used rapid editing, slow-motion gunfights, and explicit blood squibs to immerse viewers in the gritty terror of violence. Set in 1913, the film shows train heists, double crosses, and uneasy alliances unfolding against the backdrop of the Mexican Revolution. Its main characters, worn down by lives of crime, cling to a twisted sense of honor in a world that's leaving them behind. When it premiered, critics were stunned. Some called it gratuitously violent. Others hailed it as a masterpiece that forced viewers to reckon with the true cost of living by the gun. As the camera lingered on bullet-riddled bodies, cinema's old illusions of noble shootouts vanished. The Wild Bunch caused heated debates about whether it glorified bloodshed or exposed its brutality. Over time, many directors, from Martin Scorsese to Quentin Tarantino, point to its influence on their depictions of cinematic violence. The film's savage grace, moral ambiguity, and lament for a vanishing West have earned it a permanent seat in the pantheon of genre-bending classics. Dirty Harry, 1971, Clint Eastwood's Harry Callahan, became a symbol of vigilante-style policing in Dirty Harry, directed by Don Siegel. Set in a crime-ridden San Francisco, it follows a hard-nosed cop who bends rules to catch a sadistic killer. Harry's gruff one-liner, "Do you feel lucky?" became an instant catchphrase, reflecting a brand of justice that appeals to some and terrifies others. Critics labeled it fascistic, accusing the film of endorsing extrajudicial violence. Callahan's blatant disregard for protocol rattled civil libertarians who believed it championed an ends justify the means attitude. Yet many moviegoers cheered the renegade cop, frustrated by legal red tape and perceived soft crime policies. This tension fueled huge box office success, paving the way for a string of sequels and countless imitators. Beyond the controversy, Dirty Harry broke new ground for the police procedural genre. Its raw depiction of cityscapes, cynical dialogue, and morally ambiguous hero influenced decades of crime films. Whether you view Callahan as a necessary evil or a dangerous role model, the film forced conversations about law enforcement's balance between liberty and security. Today, it remains a pivotal example of how cinema can ignite cultural debates reflecting the public's conflicted feelings about crime and punishment. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange unleashed a dystopian vision that unsettled audiences worldwide. Based on Anthony Burgess's novel, it follows Alex, a charismatic youth obsessed with ultraviolence, who's eventually subjected to a government experiment aimed at eradicating his cruel impulses. Kubrick's surreal set design, stylized brutality, and off-kilter soundtrack, including Beethoven, made the film both mesmerizing and deeply disturbing. Critics debated whether it was brilliant social commentary or a dangerous incitement to violence. When incidents reminiscent of the film's scenes reportedly surfaced, some countries banned it outright. Kubrick himself withdrew it from UK distribution after personal threats, amplifying its notoriety. Cinemas that did show it often faced protests, with moral guardians arguing it sensationalized sadism. Yet beneath the brutality lies a profound philosophical question. Is it better to be forced into goodness or to choose evil freely? The film's depiction of government overreach and the erosion of free will remains thematically potent. Over time, many regard A Clockwork Orange as a cult classic that probes the darker corners of human nature, warning of oppressive authorities who'd reshape citizens at any moral cost. It endures as one of Kubrick's most iconic and debated works. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's The Devils merges historical fact and feverish nightmare in a 17th century setting where church and state collide. Based on Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun, it depicts a French priest, Father Grandier, accused of possessing local nuns through witchcraft. The film's surreal design, courtesy of Derek Jarman, underscores the fanaticism that drives the nuns into wild religious hysteria. Scenes of torture, sexual frenzy, and sacrilegious acts pushed censors to slash footage or ban the film outright. In Britain, it faced heavy editing, and some sequences believed lost for decades have only recently resurfaced in partial restorations. Critics were split. Some hailed it as a visually daring exploration of power and spiritual corruption. Others called it outright heretical, bemoaning its graphic content. Oliver Reed's commanding performance as Grandier and Vanessa Redgrave's obsessive sister Jean anchor the drama in emotional realism, even amid the film's extreme imagery. Russell intended it as an indictment of how political agendas can weaponize religion to annihilate enemies. Today, The Devils remains a touchstone for those intrigued by banned cinema. Its polarizing legacy underscores how challenging it can be to balance religious iconography, sex, and violence without inciting moral panic. Straw Dogs, 1971. In Straw Dogs, director Sam Peckinpah explores the ferocity lurking beneath civilized facades. Dustin Hoffman plays David, a timid mathematician who moves to rural England with his wife Amy, Susan George, seeking tranquility. That peace shatters when local men intimidate the couple, culminating in a notorious assault scene that critics found both ambiguous and deeply disturbing. Peckinpah amplifies tension through claustrophobic shots and sudden bursts of violence, culminating in a bloody home invasion standoff. Critics accuse the film of exploiting sexual violence and glamorizing brutality. Others argued it dissected primal aggression, revealing how even mild-mannered people can resort to savagery when cornered. In any case, Straw Dogs triggered fierce debate about moral boundaries in film. Long censored in some countries, it remains a study in psychological terror, questioning how modern society's veneer can crumble under stress. Hoffman's transformation from pacifist to ruthless defender unsettles viewers. Are we meant to cheer or recoil from his final stand? To this day, it's considered a key work in Peckinpah's filmography, demonstrating his unflinching view of human nature's violent depths and sparking ongoing arguments over cinema's portrayal of sexual aggression. The Last House on the Left, 1972, Wes Craven's directorial debut, The Last House on the Left, was an unexpected gut punch for early 1970s audiences. Loosely inspired by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, it traces two teenage girls abducted by a sadistic gang. The extended sequences of assault and murder are harrowingly realistic, pushing beyond typical horror tropes. When the gang later stumbles upon the parents of one victim, vengeance ignites in an equally graphic manner. Many theaters refused to show the film, labeling it pure exploitation. Yet Craven insisted he aimed to portray the ugliness of violence as starkly as possible. Critics and censors disagreed on whether it succeeded in condemning brutality or merely indulged in shock value. Some countries banned it outright or forced extensive cuts, fueling its notoriety among horror aficionados. Despite the controversy, the film tapped into larger societal anxieties. America was grappling with rising crime rates, the Vietnam War's moral quagmire, and a sense that traditional authority might fail in dire circumstances. By depicting average parents resorting to horrific acts, The Last House on the Left questioned whether any of us are immune to savagery. Over time, it's become a cult classic, studied for its raw impact and recognized as a foundational stepping stone in the evolution of extreme horror cinema. Pink Flamingos, 1972, John Waters' Pink Flamingos set out to be the most outrageous film ever made, and for many, it succeeded. Touted as an exercise in poor taste, it follows Divine, a proud misfit eager to defend her title as the filthiest person alive. Along the way, the film revels in grotesque humor, explicit sexual acts, and scenes designed to make audiences either recoil or roar with laughter. Immediately upon release, it polarized viewers. Mainstream critics denounced it as depraved nonsense, but underground moviegoers hailed it as a riotous celebration of counterculture. Some screenings erupted in walkouts, while others became raucous events where fans cheered on the film's brazen weirdness. Waters' low-budget aesthetic and on-location Baltimore sets only heightened its trashy, carnival-like atmosphere. Beneath its wall of shock, Pink Flamingos can be read as a rebellious satire against conventional morality, championing societal outcasts. Waters argued that bad taste was a form of artistic freedom, pushing norms to expose hypocrisy and prudishness. As years passed, it found a lasting cult following, influencing everything from midnight movie traditions to drag performance art. Equal parts repulsive and revelatory, the film remains a testament to the idea that cinema can provoke, amuse, and disgust all at once. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Also known as Day of the Woman, I Spit on Your Grave focuses on Jennifer, a writer who travels to a remote cabin for solitude but endures a brutal assault by local men. Left for dead, she meticulously hunts down each attacker, exacting extreme revenge that mirrors their own cruelty. This raw portrayal of sexual violence and retribution ignited fierce controversy. Critics lambasted it as gratuitous exploitation, objecting to the film's graphic, protracted assault scenes. Some saw it as bordering on a torture porn, with real harm overshadowing any potential moral message. Multiple countries banned it, and censors in others demanded extensive edits. Yet defenders argued that, unlike many horror tropes, Jennifer isn't a passive victim. Her revenge underscores a theme of female empowerment in a grim, patriarchal world. Director Miyazaki claimed he intended to highlight the horror of assault without glamorizing it, though opinions vary on whether he succeeded. Over time, I Spit on Your Grave spawned sequels and remakes, each stoking similar debates about exploitation versus catharsis. Despite its divisive nature, it remains a key talking point in discussions about how cinema depicts sexual violence, moral boundaries, and survival-driven vengeance. Life of Brian, 1979. Monty Python's Life of Brian follows Brian Cohen, born in the stable next to Jesus, who's repeatedly mistaken for a Messiah. This comedic premise skewers blind faith, dogmatic beliefs, and the human tendency to follow charismatic figures without question. With its irreverent take on biblical times, the film spurred immediate bans and fierce protests from religious groups who deemed it blasphemous. Yet the Pythons argued they never mocked Jesus himself. He appears briefly, treated respectfully. Their real target, they said, was organized religion's propensity for fanaticism. In scenes like the comedic stoning and the comical fracturing of political factions, the film lampoons zealotry, urging viewers to question authority. The cheeky final crucifixion scene, set to "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life," became one of cinema's most jarring musical numbers. As censorship controversies raged, many theaters refused to show it. Some local governments invoked blasphemy laws, while others slapped it with adult-only ratings. Nevertheless, Life of Brian resonated with audiences who saw it as witty satire, poking fun at human foibles rather than ridiculing faith itself. Over time, it's become a comedy classic, illustrating the power of humor to dissect cultural taboos and provoke spirited debate about the sacred and the absurd. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Regarded by many as one of the most disturbing films ever made, Cannibal Holocaust plunges into a brutal Amazonian jungle to follow a documentary crew that disappears while investigating tribal practices. Presented partly through found footage, the movie graphically depicts violence, including very real on-screen harm to animals. Rumors of genuine human atrocities circulated, prompting director Ruggero Deodato to prove no one was actually killed on set. Its raw presentation and handheld camera style lent unsettling realism that outraged critics and censors. Many countries banned the film outright, some retaining those bans for decades. Beyond the gore, Cannibal Holocaust probes the ethics of sensationalist reporting. The fictional documentary crew orchestrates violence to capture gripping footage, critiquing how media can exploit tragedy for ratings. Still, the depiction of genuine animal cruelty remains indefensible for many. Debate endures over whether the film's subtextual condemnation of exploitation justifies its horrific content. It has, however, influenced future horror works, especially those adopting found footage realism. Love it or loathe it, Cannibal Holocaust remains a grim milestone, reminding us that pushing cinematic boundaries can sometimes raise profound moral questions about where art ends and cruelty begins. Maniac, 1980. William Lustig's Maniac delves into the deranged psyche of Frank Zito, a killer prowling New York's seedy underbelly. Unlike masked slashers, Frank is painfully human, haunted by childhood trauma, and his killings come steeped in psychological torment. Horror maestro Tom Savini contributed graphic effects so intense that censors in multiple countries either banned or severely cut the film. What sets Maniac apart is its relentless focus on the murderer's perspective, forcing audiences to follow him through claustrophobic apartments and blood-spattered crime scenes. Critics pounced, calling it misogynistic and needlessly vile. Some argued it reveled in sadism, while others saw it as a stark portrait of mental decay. Joe Spinell's grimly authentic performance as Frank has since won cult admiration. The film's gritty atmosphere reflects a decaying New York City at the turn of the 1980s, amplifying its unsettling realism. Though overshadowed by more commercially successful horrors, Maniac carved out a legacy among genre devotees, intrigued by its uncomfortable intimacy with a tortured killer. It stands as an example of exploitation cinema's more troubling extremes, an unfiltered descent into a twisted mind that continues to spark debate about whether such raw brutality holds artistic merit or simply shocks for shock's sake. The Evil Dead, 1981, armed with a minuscule budget and loads of creativity, Sam Raimi unleashed The Evil Dead, a quintessential cabin-in-the-woods horror flick that became a cult phenomenon. The plot centers on 5 friends who accidentally release demonic forces via the Necronomicon, leading to gruesome possessions and relentless gore. Raimi's innovative camera work, featuring darting demon's eye shots, plus practical effects, gave the film a visceral edge. Censors in multiple countries took issue with the blood-drenched sequences, sometimes labeled as video nasty. One particular assault scene involving demonic vines sparked additional outrage for its disturbing nature. Yet horror fans embrace The Evil Dead for its audacity and grimly humorous tone, propelling it from midnight movie obscurity to cult classic status. Bruce Campbell's Ash Williams stands out as an ordinary everyman contending with nightmarish evil, a role that would evolve into a wisecracking action hero in subsequent sequels. The film's off-kilter blend of scares and slapstick paved the way for splatstick horror comedies in later years. Despite severe censorship battles, The Evil Dead remains a landmark in do-it-yourself filmmaking, proving that grit, ingenuity, and a bit of insanity can triumph over a tight budget to create a timeless fright fest. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, 1986. John McNaughton's Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer offers an unvarnished glimpse into the life of a murderer modeled loosely on real convict Henry Lee Lucas. Shot on a modest budget, its somber documentary-like style disconcerted audiences expecting more theatrical horror. Michael Rooker's understated performance as Henry, a polite drifter who kills without obvious motive, made the violence chillingly realistic. Rather than jump scares, the film relies on an ominous aura, showing how Henry casually seduces others into sharing his brutal acts, most notably his troubled friend Otis. Critics deemed it unflinchingly bleak, questioning whether it crossed lines into exploitative sadism. Many regions slapped it with bans or demanded cuts, citing its profoundly disturbing content. Still, supporters praised its refusal to glamorize serial killers. Unlike sensational slasher flicks, this film invites viewers into a murderer's mundane world, revealing the banality of evil. Its portrayal of random, motiveless killing challenged the idea that killers are easily recognizable monsters. Over time, Henry gained cult respect as a slow-burning character study that divorces violence from any sense of escapist fun. A pioneer of the psychological horror subgenre, it remains a deeply unsettling watch, asking whether true horror might lie in its quiet, almost casual realism. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988, Martin Scorsese's adaptation of Nikos Kazantzakis' novel, The Last Temptation of Christ, rattled religious institutions worldwide. Far from a traditional biblical epic, it portrays Jesus, Willem Dafoe, wrestling with mortal doubts, fears, and yearnings. In one extended vision, he imagines stepping off the cross to lead a normal life, an idea many saw as undermining core Christian beliefs. Religious groups picketed theaters and condemned the film as heretical. Some countries banned it, while others demanded disclaimers or heavily restricted its screenings. Scorsese, a Catholic himself, insisted his intent was reverent, to explore the depth of Christ's humanity and the weight of his sacrifice. Critics were likewise divided. Some found it spiritually stirring, while others dismissed it as sacrilegious conjecture. Beyond the controversy, the film boasts a haunting Peter Gabriel soundtrack and a powerful supporting cast, including Harvey Keitel as a torn Judas. Many cinephiles applaud its daring departure from sanitized religious portrayals, suggesting that by emphasizing Jesus' human vulnerabilities, it amplifies the significance of his ultimate choice. Today, The Last Temptation of Christ stands as both a cinematic milestone in religious storytelling and a case study in how art can ignite fervent clashes between faith and free expression. Natural Born Killers, 1994. Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers unleashes a kaleidoscopic trip through media sensationalism and ultra-violence. Starring Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis as Mickey and Mallory Knox, the film tracks their homicidal road trip across America and the media circus that elevates them to cult hero status. Through delirious editing, garish colors, and frenetic shifts in style, Stone critiques a society obsessed with fame at any cost. Critics and viewers were starkly divided. Some hailed it as a biting indictment of tabloid culture, while others condemned it as a glorification of wanton murder. Reports of real-life crimes allegedly inspired by the film intensified debates about cinema's capacity to incite violence. Lawsuits merged, accusing Stone of fostering dangerous copycats, though none prevailed. Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of a sleazy TV journalist further spotlights the media's complicity in creating celebrity criminals. The film's rapid-fire montage approach can be overwhelming, yet it mimics the manic overstimulation of modern media consumption. Despite its chaotic veneer, Natural Born Killers delivers a pointed message. In an age where killers become stars overnight, perhaps the biggest villain is the public's endless appetite for blood-soaked spectacle. Kids, 1995, directed by Larry Clark and scripted by Harmony Korine, Kids rips the veneer off teenage life in mid-90s New York. Focusing on skateboarding, drug use, and sexual experimentation, it follows Telly, a self-proclaimed ladies' man, whose encounters carry grave consequences for everyone in his orbit. Shot in a raw documentary style, the film thrusts viewers into a world of perpetual partying and parental absence. Outrage erupted over its frank depictions of underage sex, with some calling it exploitation and borderline child pornography. Clark defended Kids as an unfiltered snapshot of real urban teenagers, insisting that mainstream media sanitized youth culture. Critics were split. Some lauded its gritty honesty, while others felt it crossed moral lines by placing actual teenage actors in explicit scenarios. Beyond the shock value, the film forces conversations about sexuality, peer pressure, and the silent epidemic of HIV among disaffected teens. It also highlights the void left when adults fail to provide guidance, leaving youths to navigate a minefield of risks alone. Over time, Kids has become a cult reference point for raw indie filmmaking, capturing a specific zeitgeist and challenging audiences to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about adolescent life. Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975, Pier Paolo Pasolini's Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, adapts the Marquis de Sade's notorious text, relocating it to the final days of World War II in the Republic of Salo. 4 fascist libertines subject abducted youths to sadistic acts, from sexual degradation to force-fed horrors. Banned in multiple countries, the film's explicit brutality and unrelenting despair tested the limits of what audiences could endure. Pasolini intended it as a searing critique of totalitarian power, likening political tyranny to the systematic dehumanization depicted on screen. Yet, its unflinching detail led many to dismiss it as revolting or pornographic. Controversy spiked further after Pasolini's own violent death shortly before release, fueling speculation about the film's deeper significance as his final statement on corruption. For decades, Salo was difficult to find, eventually emerging in limited form with cuts still contested by censors. Some regard it as an essential piece of political cinema, forcing viewers to confront the extremes of authoritarian abuse. Others see it as an exercise in grotesque exploitation. Regardless, it remains one of the most polarizing films ever made, a bleak testament to how far a director might go to condemn human cruelty under oppressive regimes. Last Tango in Paris, 1972, Bernardo Bertolucci's Last Tango in Paris focuses on a disillusioned American widower, Marlon Brando, and a young French woman, Maria Schneider, who enter a psychologically intense sexual relationship in a vacant Paris apartment. The film's raw sexual content, especially an infamous butter scene, sparked immediate condemnation. Authorities in multiple countries banned or heavily censored it. Critics were divided on whether the explicitness served a deeper exploration of grief, loneliness, and existential angst, or simply crossed into exploitative territory. Brando's performance, blending vulnerability with brutal detachment, earned both praise and controversy. Schneider later spoke out about feeling manipulated, which inflamed debates on consent and ethics in filmmaking. Despite the shock value, Last Tango in Paris found critical acclaim for its stark cinematography and unfiltered portrayal of adult loneliness. It captured an era of changing social mores, where sexual freedom collided with lingering taboos. Over time, however, revelations about the filming process, especially Schneider's discomfort, cast a shadow, prompting discussions about the line between artistic authenticity and abuse. The film remains a potent example of how mature content can revolutionize cinema while igniting ethical alarms about director-actor power dynamics. Caligula, 1979, produced by Penthouse founder Bob Guccione and partially directed by Tinto Brass, Caligula aimed to merge historical epic with explicit erotic imagery, a combination guaranteed to spark controversy. The film stars Malcolm McDowell as Rome's deranged Emperor Caligula, depicting scenes of political intrigue laced with graphic sex, violence, and lavish depravity. Rumors of Guccione adding hardcore sequences without the director's knowledge fueled the chaos around its release. Critics were flabbergasted by the film's unrestrained display of orgies, torture, and decadence, often overshadowing any historical analysis. Many theaters refused to screen it unless heavily cut. While some praised its extravagant set designs and star-studded cast, including Helen Mirren and Peter O'Toole, they also questioned if any coherent artistic vision survived the layers of reshoots and inserted pornography. Today, Caligula endures as a symbol of unchecked excess, both on-screen and behind the camera. Its defenders argue it reflects the real horrors of imperial Rome, while detractors see it as a cynical mix of pornography and half-baked commentary on power corruption. Regardless, it stands as a testament to how a big budget and star wattage can collide with explicit content, resulting in one of cinema's most infamous spectacles of anything goes storytelling.